What happens when the underdog who fought City Hall becomes the villain in an even darker story? Pepe's Towing built their reputation battling corrupt politicians for nearly 2 decades, winning a massive $1.3 million settlement that seemed to prove they were the good guys all along. But just 2 years after that victory, everything changed. The city of Riverside filed a lawsuit so damning it threatened to destroy everything the Acosta family had built. Over 600 illegal tows, targeting vulnerable families, a potential $15 million judgment. This is the story of how America's most determined towing company went from hero to accused predator. In October 1978, Jose and Delfina Acosta made a bet on the American dream. With just one tow truck converted from a Ford 350 pickup, they launched Pepe's Towing service in the heart of Los Angeles. The couple worked tirelessly, building their reputation one tow at a time in the tight-knit community of Boyle Heights. Word spread quickly about the honest service and fair prices, and soon Pepe's became the name people trusted when they were stranded on the side of the road. As the business grew, their sons Jose Jr. and Manuel watched their parents' dedication and decided to follow in their footsteps. In March 1987, both sons joined the company full-time, bringing fresh energy and ambitious ideas. 2 years later, Lorenzo Navarro became part of the team, completing what would become the leadership trio that would transform Pepe's from a local operation into a regional powerhouse. But tragedy struck in 1992 when founder Jose Acosta passed away, having only seen his company grow to 8 trucks. His sons refused to let the dream die. Over the next decades, they expanded aggressively, growing the fleet to over 80 trucks, ranging from light-duty to massive 75-ton rotators. By 2015, Pepe's employed more than 90 people across 11 locations throughout Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. They secured contracts with over 20 police agencies and became a trusted partner for California's Freeway Service Patrol. The immigrant family's small towing operation had become a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Everything seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, a battle was brewing that would consume the next 2 decades. Manny Acosta couldn't understand it. Pepe's Towing had an impeccable track record, contracts with police departments across Southern California, and a reputation for reliability that was second to none. Yet the city of San Bernardino kept rejecting their applications to join the official tow rotation. Year after year, application after application, the answer was always no. He first applied in 1999, then again in 2005, 2011, 2016, and finally 2018. Each rejection stung more than the last. What Manny didn't know at first was that the game was rigged from the start. The same 6 towing companies had held San Bernardino's rotation contracts for over 20 years without any competitive bidding process whatsoever. These contractors operated in a cozy monopoly, and city officials seemed determined to keep it that way. When Manny began pushing for an open bidding process and speaking publicly about the lack of transparency, the city's response wasn't to address his concerns, but to create new barriers specifically designed to keep Pepe's out. In 2005, San Bernardino suddenly instituted a new requirement that all towing contractors must have at least 65,000 square feet of outdoor storage space. On paper, it sounded reasonable. In reality, it was impossible. The shocking truth? 4 of the 6 existing contractors didn't meet this requirement themselves. But here's the kicker. The city only enforced this rule against new applicants. The existing contractors were grandfathered in, protected by their political connections, while Pepe's was held to standards their competitors never had to meet. The corruption went even deeper than anyone imagined. By 2018, Manny Acosta had had enough. He'd spent nearly 2 decades playing by rules that were designed to make him fail. Armed with detailed documentation, he filed a federal lawsuit that would expose one of the ugliest corruption schemes in San Bernardino's troubled history. The allegations were explosive, First Amendment retaliation, civil rights violations, conspiracy to deny equal protection, and evidence of a massive pay-to-play operation where tow contractors were essentially buying their contracts with campaign contributions. The evidence was damning. Between 2016 and 2018, Acosta had sent city leaders and police officials multiple detailed lists showing specific areas where the 6 contracted tow companies were violating their agreements. Instead of addressing these violations, police officials allegedly falsified compliance documents to protect the favored contractors. Inspections were either missing, incomplete, or completely fabricated. The city was actively covering up violations while simultaneously blocking Pepe's over-technicalities. Then came the bombshell testimony. Don Smith, the mayor's own field representative, filed a declaration stating he personally witnessed the owner of Danny's Towing, Danny Alcarez, hand Mayor John Valdivia, an envelope full of cash during a late-night meeting at a restaurant in fall 2018. According to Smith's statement, Alcarez explicitly said the money came from the existing tow carriers as a thank you for the mayor's continued support. The corruption wasn't just implied anymore. There was an eyewitness to what appeared to be a straight-up bribe. The federal case moved forward, and in September 2020, just before trial, San Bernardino blinked. They agreed to pay Pepe's $1.3 million to settle the lawsuit. The $1.3 million settlement should have been Manny Acosta's vindication. After 18 years of fighting, he'd finally exposed the corruption and forced San Bernardino to pay for their discriminatory practices. Pepe's was finally approved for the city's tow rotation, and it seemed like justice had prevailed. The settlement made headlines across Southern California, and Manny's lawyers called it a victory against municipal corruption and unjust favoritism. For a brief moment, Pepe's Towing looked like the scrappy underdog who'd taken on City Hall and won. But the victory celebration was short-lived. Just months after the San Bernardino settlement, in December 2020, Pepe's filed another federal lawsuit, this time against the city of Rancho Cucamonga and the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. The allegations were similar: unfair treatment, discriminatory practices, and the sudden termination of their towing agreement after they complained about being given fewer jobs than competing companies. The pattern was emerging. Everywhere Pepe's went, controversy seemed to follow. Then, in October 2021, San Bernardino was back in the picture. Despite the $1.3 million settlement and Pepe's finally being added to the rotation, the city suspended them for minor violations like missing signage and a section of property line without a curb stop. Meanwhile, other contractors with more serious violations remained on the rotation. Manny filed yet another lawsuit, claiming the city was retaliating against him for exposing their corruption. The legal bills kept mounting, and the battles never seemed to end. What Manny didn't know was that while he was fighting these government entities, a far more serious storm was gathering on the horizon. December 2022 brought a lawsuit that would change everything. The city of Riverside filed an action against Pepe's Towing that made all the previous corruption allegations look tame by comparison. This wasn't about unfair bidding processes or government favoritism. This was about alleged predatory practices targeting some of Southern California's most vulnerable residents. The accusations were stunning. Between April 2019 and May 2021, Pepe's allegedly conducted 622 illegal tows from Lincoln Plaza Shopping Center, collecting over $252,000 in unauthorized fees. According to the lawsuit, Pepe's had no contract or authorization from the shopping center's owner, property manager, or security company. None of them even knew the towing was happening. The city claimed Pepe's deployed spotters to patrol the parking lot, looking for vehicles to tow and specifically targeting vulnerable victims. Lincoln Plaza sits next to the Van Buren Drive-In, which hosts a weekly swap meet that creates overflow parking. The lawsuit alleged that Pepe's took advantage of this situation, towing vehicles from confused shoppers and swap meet attendees who believed they were legally parked. The demographics of the victims were particularly troubling. According to court documents, the overwhelming majority were Hispanic or Latino residents from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The city argued these victims had difficulty disputing Pepe's authority to tow their vehicles and faced barriers in challenging the predatory practices. Many victims believed their cars had been stolen, only to discover hours later they'd been towed to Pepe's facility over 10 miles away in Colton. The lawsuit painted a picture of systematic exploitation that made the corruption fights look like sideshow. The details of Riverside's lawsuit revealed what prosecutors called a staggering abuse and a blatant and bold attempt to take money from vulnerable families. The timing made it even more disturbing. Much of the alleged illegal towing activity ramped up during the height of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, when victims were at their most financially vulnerable. Families struggling through lockdowns and job losses suddenly found themselves facing unexpected towing fees they couldn't afford. When panic-stricken victims arrived at Lincoln Plaza to find their vehicles missing, many assumed they'd been stolen. They'd call the police, file reports, and frantically search the area. Eventually, they'd discover their cars had been towed to Pepe's storage facility in Colton, requiring them to find transportation for the 10-mile journey. Some victims were left stranded with small children and no car seats, creating dangerous situations. Once they reached the facility, the nightmare continued. Pepe's allegedly redacted critical information on the tow authorization forms, hiding details about how long vehicles had been impounded, who authorized the tow, and addresses. The fee structure created a trap. If victims couldn't retrieve their vehicles by arbitrary deadlines set by Pepe's, the impound fees would increase dramatically. For families already struggling financially, these escalating charges became impossible to pay. Vehicles that went unclaimed were eventually sold, with Pepe's keeping all the profits. The city calculated that with 622 illegal tows, Pepe's could face penalties of $25,000 per violation under California's Bain Act. The potential judgment, a staggering $15.5 million. If true, the company that fought so hard against corruption had allegedly become something far worse. The Riverside lawsuit wasn't happening in a vacuum. A closer look at Pepe's history revealed a disturbing pattern of complaints that had been building for years. The Better Business Bureau file on Pepe's contained dozens of complaints about similar issues. Customers reported missing belongings from their towed vehicles, including tools, electronics, and personal items worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. One complaint described over $2,500 in property disappearing from a towed car, with Pepe's staff allegedly avoiding calls when confronted. Multiple complaints described aggressive towing practices. People reported their vehicles being towed while they were actively loading them in their own driveways or apartment parking lots. One customer claimed her car was towed after parking for just 30 minutes to unload furniture at her brother's garage. Another common complaint involved late-night tows, with no after-hours vehicle retrieval available, forcing customers to wait until the next business day while storage fees accumulated. Pepe's would defend these actions by citing apartment complex rules and private property agreements. But the volume of similar complaints raised questions. The darkest shadow over Pepe's history came from 2006. One of their drivers, Paul Sassenberger, was involved in an incident where Leoncio Flores was crushed and Kaleld trying to stop Sassenberger from towing his Chevrolet Suburban. Flores had offered to pay the $50 unhooking fee to avoid the higher impound costs, but the tow proceeded anyway. The 42-year-old forklift operator earning $30,000 a year was trapped under the truck and dead at the scene. The incident drew national attention to predatory towing practices and resulted in a $2 million settlement paid by Pepe's insurance carriers. Through all the accusations and lawsuits, the Acosta family has maintained their innocence. When Riverside's lawsuit hit the news, Pepe's attorney issued a statement calling the company a model of integrity and professionalism and denying all allegations. The company's position has been consistent across all legal challenges. They operate within the law, comply with all regulations, and provide legitimate towing services authorized by property owners or law enforcement agencies. Every tow they claim is properly documented and legal. The family has continued operating the business while fighting multiple legal battles simultaneously. By 2022, Pepe's had expanded to over 14 locations across Southern California, with contracts serving numerous cities. The third generation of Acostas had joined the operation, signaling the family's commitment to the legacy Jose and Delfina built decades earlier. Joshua Acosta, Jose Jr.'s son, became the public face of the company's modernization effort, launching a YouTube channel showcasing dramatic vehicle recoveries that has attracted over 2 million views and built a dedicated following of towing enthusiasts worldwide. Manny's daughter Laura took on a leadership role managing human resources and representing the company at social and political events. The Acostas presented themselves as a family business, deeply invested in their community, involved in charitable causes and local organizations. They emphasized their safety record, their partnerships with California Highway Patrol and Freeway Service Patrol programs, and their 4 decades of service. To them, the lawsuits represented attacks on a successful, minority-owned business that had dared to challenge powerful interests. The question remained, were they victims of retaliation, or had success corrupted the very values they claimed to represent? The story of Pepe's towing service is one of the most dramatic reversals in California business history. A family that spent nearly 2 decades fighting government corruption, exposing pay-to-play schemes and battling discriminatory practices, suddenly found themselves accused of exploitation that made their opponents' actions look minor by comparison. The $1.3 million they won from San Bernardino could be dwarfed by the potential $15.5 million judgment in Riverside's lawsuit. Victory had turned to ashes in just 2 years. The timeline raises troubling questions. Did the years of legal battles and rejection harden Pepe's approach to business? Did winning against San Bernardino embolden them to push boundaries elsewhere? Or were they always operating this way, and the Riverside lawsuit finally exposed practices that had been happening all along? The allegations suggest that while Manny Acosta was positioning himself as a crusader against corruption, his company may have been running an operation that targeted the most vulnerable members of society for profit. The contrast couldn't be starker. On one hand, an immigrant family building a successful business, fighting for fair treatment, and exposing genuine government corruption. On the other hand, accusations of systematic predatory towing that separated struggling families from their vehicles during a pandemic. The lawsuits against various cities remain unresolved, but the damage to Pepe's reputation may be permanent. The American dream story that inspired so many had transformed into a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the fine line between fighting for justice and becoming the very thing you claim to oppose. What really happened at Pepe's towing service? The courts will eventually decide, but the heartbreaking truth is that a legacy built over 40 years now hangs in the balance, tarnished by allegations that may never fully be answered.